The dining room table was a sea of polished silver, and starched white linen crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier throwing tiny rainbows onto the wall. You could hear the gentle clink of fine china, and the low murmur of polite conversation. My husband David sat beside me, but he felt a million miles away. His shoulders were tense, his smile a little too quick, a little too tight. These gatherings with his family were always a performance, and we were always being graded. Id felt the weight of their judgment from the beginning, the subtle remarks about my career, my family, the neighborhood I grew up in. It was never overt, just a constant low hum of disapproval. So when his mother announced she wanted a formal gift exchange for her birthday, the pressure was immense. I knew what was expected: something new, something shiny, something with a receipt from a store they all recognized. For them, I couldn't tell. The name hung in the air, they just stared blankly. It's a 1957 Owens Continental cabin cruiser, he explained, and now he was smiling through his tears, a real radiant, boyish smile. I've talked about it for years. But only to her, only ever to her. He looked at me with such overwhelming love that I thought my heart would burst. I never dreamed it was possible. It was just a story I told myself, a silly dream. He turned back to his family, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity. While you were all buying me things I didn't need, she was listening. She heard the one thing I wanted most in the world, the thing I was too afraid to even ask for 3 years. She's been saving, she's been planning. She found her, she found the wanderer. She's down at the harbor right now waiting. This key, it doesn't just start an engine. It unlocks a dream, my dream, the one she remembered, when even I had almost forgot. The silence in the room was absolute. It was no longer the comfortable silence of a family gathering, it was a profound, uncomfortable stillness. The jokes about the small gift were now ashes in their mouths. His brother Mark looked down at his hands. His mother's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. They were all realizing in that single devastating moment the sheer chasm between their understanding of him and mine. Their gifts were transactions, obligations. Mine was a testament, it was a map of his own heart returned to him, made real. The focus in the room shifted completely. It was no longer about the value of the objects on the table. The golf clubs looked garish now. The expensive sweater seemed meaningless. The true measure of the gift wasn't its price tag, it was its pricelessness. It was the depth of listening. It required the years of patience and sacrifice. It represented the intimate knowledge of what truly makes a person's soul sing. He stood up, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. He didn't seem to see anyone else in the room anymore. He held out his other hand to me. Take me to her, he said, his voice full of awe. Please take me to my boat. We walked out of the house together, leaving the party, and the silence behind the laughter of his family was gone, replaced by the sound of our footsteps on the path. He didn't say a word on the drive to the marina. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles, his gaze fixed on the key in his lap. When we got to the dock, and he saw her, the wanderer, tied up and bobbing gently in the evening light, he stopped walking. He just stood there for a long time, taking her in the old lines, the weathered wood, the promise of 1,000 quiet mornings. Then he turned to me, and he pulled me into the tightest embrace. He didn't thank me, he didn't need to. I felt it in the way he held me, in the steady beat of his heart against mine. He was home, and the key in his pocket wasn't just metal anymore. It was a promise kept, it was a shared dream, finally beautifully unlocked. The comments continued, light and cutting. Well, it's the thought that counts, isn't it? His sister chimed in, not even trying to hide her smirk. I've always been the one who asks about the stories, at family gatherings, when everyone else is talking about sports or politics, or the latest movie. I am the one in the corner, with your grandmother asking about the china pattern, or how she met your grandfather. It's not that I don't care about the present, I do. But I've always felt that the present is just a room, and the past is what built the walls, laid the floorboards, put the windows in. You can live in the room without ever knowing how it was made. But y'all never really understand why the light falls a certain way, or why that one floorboard creaks. Your family, your husband's family, they are masters of the present moment. They live there. It's a wonderful, vibrant, noisy place. But it's also a place that moves very fast. Birthdays, holidays, they're about the newest gadget, the flashiest car, the most expensive bottle of whiskey. The gifts are opened with a quick cheer, a thank you. And then it's on to the next thing. There's no lingering. I noticed that early on. I noticed that the past, their past, was like a country they had all emigrated from and never talked about. It started last summer, when your mother-in-law asked me to help her bring down some Christmas decorations from the attic. It was one of those old dusty attics full of forgotten things. And tucked away in a corner behind a box of old linens was a small cardboard box. It wasn't labeled. I opened it out of curiosity. It was filled with photographs, but they were in a terrible state. They were stuck together. Faded, some were torn, many had that sticky, warped look of photos that had gotten damp and dried. Again, they were a mess. But when I looked closely, I could see the faces: your husband as a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, your mother-in-law with a hairstyle I'd only ever seen in movies, and other people I didn't recognize. I asked your mother-in-law about them later. She just waved a hand. "Oh, those old things," she said, "from before the fire." I didn't know there had been a fire. She didn't elaborate. "Water damage ruined most of them. I was meaning to throw them out, just never got around to it." Throw them out. The idea made my heart ache. These weren't just pictures, they were moments, they were proof of a life lived. I asked if I could take them. She looked at me like I was a little strange, but she said yes. So I took the box home. I spread the photos out on my desk. It was a puzzle, a heartbreaking puzzle. I knew I couldn't restore the physical copies, not with the damage they had. But I have a good scanner, and I'd dabbled in photo restoration software. I decided I would try. For your husband's birthday, it became my secret project. For months, every evening after work, I'd sit at my computer. It was painstaking work. I'd scan a photo, and the software would show me all the flaws, the tears, the scratches, the faded colors. I'd work on them pixel by pixel. I'd use a cloning tool to rebuild a missing corner of a smile. I'd adjust the contrast to bring back the blue of a summer sky that had faded to a dull gray. I'd remove the stains, the watermarks. It was like archaeology. I was gently brushing away the dirt of time to see the image underneath. Some photos were easier than others. A picture of your husband and his brother building a snowman just needed some color correction. But others were more challenging. There was one, a group shot, where a whole section was torn away. I had to reconstruct two people's faces from tiny fragments that were left. I spent weeks on that one photo alone. I'd zoom in so close that the faces lost all meaning. They were just shapes and colors, and I'd slowly, carefully piece them back together. I didn't say a word. I just kept my small, calm smile in place, my hands folded in my lap. Let them have their moment. They had no idea what they were holding. I learned things about his family through this process, things no one ever talked about. I saw warmth between his parents in the early photos that seemed to have cooled in later years. I saw a little girl with bright red hair, who appeared in many of the childhood pictures, always laughing, always clinging to your husband's arm. I didn't know who she was. A cousin, I assumed. I found a photo of a young man standing by a classic car, looking proud and a little shy. He had the same eyes as your father-in-law. When I felt I had done all I could, I had the restored images printed on high-quality archival paper. I bought a beautiful leather-bound album. I didn't just put the photos in order. I tried to tell a story. I started with the oldest ones. I could identify the wedding photos, the black-and-white portraits of serious-looking people in their Sunday best. Then, I moved through the years, the childhood photos, the holidays, the graduations. I left captions blank. I didn't know all the names, all the dates. I thought that would be part of the gift. We could fill them in together. The day of the party arrived. The house was loud and full of life, just like always. The pile of gifts on the table was impressive, wrapped in shiny paper, big boxes, small boxes that probably held jewelry. My album was in a simple, large, flat box. It felt humble next to the others. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. What if they didn't get it? What if they thought it was silly? When it came time for gifts, your husband made a show of it. As he always does, he tore into the presents with gusto. A new set of golf clubs, got a huge cheer, a smartwatch from his brother, a weekend getaway package from you. Each one was met with applause and laughter. Then he picked up my box. It was light. He shook it gently. Feels like a sweater, he joked. He opened it. He pulled out the album. There was a moment of silence. I saw his face, polite confusion. "Oh," he said, "a photo album. That's thoughtful." Then the comments started from his brother. "What is it, a history project? You gonna quiz us on ancient history?" A cousin chimed in, "Yeah. Can we see the golf clubs again?" There was a ripple of laughter, not mean laughter, but dismissive, the kind of laughter that says, "We don't really see the value in this." Your husband, to his credit, opened the cover. He was just being polite. I could tell. He turned the first page, the black-and-white wedding photo of his parents. "Wow," he said, his tone softening just a bit. "Look how young they were." He turned another page, a picture of him And his brother as toddlers on a beach. I remember that swimsuit his brother said, the mockery gone from his voice, replaced by a flicker of something else recognition. But then your husband stopped. He was on a page, about halfway through the album. His hand, which had been casually turning the pages, froze. Then, it began to tremble just slightly. The chatter in the room died down. Everyone noticed. The change, the energy shifted, the air got heavy. He was staring at a photo I had worked on for a very long time. It was a candid shot taken in a backyard. A boy about 10 years old, who was unmistakably your husband, had his arm around the shoulders of the little girl with the red hair. They were both laughing, their faces smudged with what looked like chocolate ice cream. The sun was setting behind them. It was a perfect moment of pure, unadulterated childhood joy. His finger touched the glassine sheet over the photo. His voice was a whisper, rough with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Lily. He said the name like a prayer. No one in the room moved, no one breathed. He looked up at his mother, his eyes wide, glistening. Mom, it's Lily. I thought all the pictures of her were gone. It was David who finally broke. He couldn't take it anymore. He pushed his chair back, the sound startling in the room. He walked around the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at anyone, but the book. Gently, he took it from his mother's hands. Your mother-in-law's hand went to her mouth. She came over slowly, as if in a trance. She looked down at the photo. A single tear traced a line down her cheek. Lily, she echoed. Her voice broke. My sister. I didn't know. I had no idea the little girl with the red hair was his aunt, his mother's younger sister. She had died of leukemia when she was 12 years old. The fire your mother-in-law had mentioned wasn't a house fire. It was the fire of grief that had burned through their family. They had lost almost all their photos of her in a basement flood. A few years after she died, it was a pain. They had never really spoken about a ghost that haunted the family without a face. And now here she was, not a ghost, a laughing, vibrant little girl brought back to life. The mockery was gone. It was swept away by a wave of shared memory, of shared loss, of shared love. Your husband's brother came over and put a hand on his shoulder. His cousins gathered around. They weren't looking at an old photo anymore. They were looking at a person, a part of their story they thought was lost forever. Your husband looked at me. His eyes were full of tears. He wasn't even trying to hide. You did this? He asked. I just nodded. He stood up and hugged me. It was a long, tight hug, a hug that said everything words couldn't. Thank you, he whispered into my ear. You have no idea. You've given me back a piece of my heart. For the rest of the evening, the party changed. The new golf club sat forgotten in the corner. The album was on the coffee table, and everyone was crowded around it. But now, they weren't just looking, they were talking. Your mother-in-law was pointing at pictures, telling stories I'd never heard, stories about Lily, about her spirit, her laugh, the way she could always make people smile. Your father-in-law, who is usually so quiet, was talking about the young man by the car, his own brother who had died in a car accident years ago. The album wasn't just a collection of pictures anymore. It was a key. It had unlocked a door to a room in their family home that had been sealed shut for decades. Later, as people were starting to leave, your husband took me aside. He held the album in his hands like it was the most precious thing he owned. I can't believe you did this, he said. All those months, you must have spent hundreds of hours. I told him. It was a labor of love. And it was. He shook his head. Everyone else gave me things for the life I have now, which is great. I love it. But you gave me back a part of my life I thought was gone forever. You didn't just give me a gift, you gave my whole family gift. You healed something I didn't even know was still broken. I saw the family the next week for a barbecue. The album was still on the coffee table, and I noticed something different. The conversation was different. It was still loud, still full of laughter. But now the past was welcome at the table. It wasn't a separate country anymore, it was part of the present. And I finally felt, after all these years, like I wasn't just married into the family. I felt like I had helped rebuild one of its walls. I had helped them remember who they were. And in doing so Mother, he said, his voice quiet but firm, you haven't even looked inside. Finally understood my place among them. JSON parse, or network error, expecting value line 281 column, 1 char 1540. Air in the dining room was always thick with it, not just the smell of roasted meat and expensive wine, but something else, a kind of unspoken competition. A quiet battle of taste and intellect. My husband's family, you see, they pride themselves on their knowledge, not just a casual interest, but a deep, almost academic understanding of art. and antiques every holiday, every gathering. It was the same. The conversation would inevitably turn to acquisitions, to auctions, to the subtle tells of a genuine piece versus a clever forgery. I loved them, I truly did, but I always felt like an observer in a museum where I hadn't read the placards. I'd found the compass a month earlier at a dusty estate sale out in the countryside. It wasn't with the flashy items up front. It was in a wooden box in the back tucked under some old linens. It felt heavy in my hand, cool brass, tarnished with age. The glass was a little cloudy, but the needle swung freely. The cardinal points were marked with such delicate precise engraving. It just felt important. It had a quiet dignity to it. I didn't buy it thinking it was worth a fortune. I bought it because it spoke to me. It felt like a piece of history you could hold in your palm. I imagined it guiding someone, maybe on a ship across an ocean, or through a dense forest. I knew my father-in-law Arthur had a soft spot for nautical things. It seemed perfect. So there I was, placing the small wrapped box next to his dinner plate for his birthday. The usual pleasantries were exchanged, but I could feel the subtle shift in attention. His fingers, elegant and precise, untied the ribbon slowly. He lifted the lid, parted the tissue paper, and his eyebrows raised just a fraction. He didn't say anything at first. He just lifted the compass out, holding it up to the light from the crystal chandelier. His brother Robert leaned in. Well now, what have we here? Robert was the loudest of the self-appointed experts. His confidence was a force of nature. Arthur turned the compass over in his hands. A mariner's compass. Interesting. The patina is unusual. May I? Robert didn't wait for an answer. He took it, pulling a small loop from his waistcoat pocket. Of course, he had a loop on him. He examined the brass casing, the engraving around the rim. He sniffed a short, dismissive sound. The workmanship is crude. Look at the welding here on the gimbal ring, sloppy modern. He opened the cover, his thumb gently stroking the inscription. He was silent for a long time, just staring at the words. When he looked up, his eyes were shining with unshed tears. The smug smiles around the table began to falter. My sister-in-law Caroline chimed in. Oh, it's charming in its own way, dear. Wherever did you find it? One of those flea markets? She said the words with a gentle distaste, as if referring to something unsanitary. An estate sale, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Robert handed it back to Arthur with a definitive shake of his head. I'm afraid you've been had, my dear. It's a reproduction, a decent one, I'll grant you, but a reproduction nonetheless. See the coloring of the brass, it's been chemically aged. It doesn't have the right warmth, and the lettering far too sharp for something supposedly 200 years old. A few polite, uncomfortable laughs trickled around the table. Oh, don't feel bad, Caroline said, patting my hand. We've all been duped once or twice. It's a rite of passage. I looked down at my plate. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, but then I caught my husband's eye. Mark was sitting across from me. He didn't look upset or embarrassed. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, a secret smile, and he gave a tiny, deliberate nod. My heart, which had been sinking, suddenly fluttered. This was the moment. Mark cleared his throat. Well, Robert, that's a very confident assessment. It's a good thing, then, that I took the liberty of inviting a second opinion. He pushed his chair back. If y'all all excuse me for just one moment. The table fell into a puzzled silence. Robert's smirk faltered. Arthur continued to study the compass, his expression now more curious than critical. We could hear Mark's footsteps retreating down the hall, then returning a moment later accompanied by another set. And then he walked in. Dr. Alastair Finch. I recognized him immediately from the photographs in the art magazines. He was the head curator of decorative arts at the city's most prestigious museum, a man whose authentication could make or break an item's reputation and value. He was a legend. He was also, as it turned, an old university friend of Mark's. Everyone, Mark said, his voice calm and clear. I'd like you to meet Dr. Finch. I thought, given the family's passion for antiques, he might add some professional context to the evening. The shock in the room was palpable. Caroline's mouth was slightly agape. Robert had gone pale. Arthur stood up, extending a hand. Dr. Finch, this is an unexpected honor. Do you know what this is? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't just asking his mother, he was asking all of them. This is Grandfather Arthur's book, the book of poems he read to us from when we were children, the one he read to Grandmother Eleanor every evening, the one we thought was lost forever. Dr. Finch was a quiet man with sharp, intelligent eyes. Arthur, a pleasure. Mark Told me it was your birthday. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Not at all, Arthur said, though he looked utterly bewildered. Mark gestured to the compass, which was still in Arthur's hand. My wife found this. We were just discussing its provenance. Dr. Finch's eyes lit up with professional interest. Ah yes, Mark mentioned a nautical piece, may I? Arthur handed it over with a new kind of reverence. The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Dr. Finch didn't need a loop. He simply held the compass, feeling its weight. He ran a thumb over the engraved rose on the base. He tilted it, watching the needle settle. He spent a long silent minute, just looking. The pressure in the room built with every second. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving around the table, finally settling on me. Where did you say you found this? At an estate sale in Oakridge Manor, I said, my voice steady now. A slow smile spread across Dr. Finch's face. Oakridge Manor. That makes perfect sense. That was the final residence of Admiral James Harrington's descendants. He retired there after the Napoleonic Wars. Robert found his voice, though it was strained. It's clearly a fake. The construction is all wrong. Dr. Finch turned his calm eyes to Robert. Is it? The construction is precisely what confirms it. This isn't a standard mariner's compass. This is a surveyor's compass of a very specific and rare type, commissioned by the Royal Society in the late 18th century, for a mapping expedition of the Pacific Northwest. The crude welding you noted is a hallmark of the particular workshop that produced them. They used a technique that was considered outdated even then, but it was incredibly durable. Only about. He turned the book towards his mother, pointing to the inscription. This is his handwriting. He gave this to her when they were first married. He then carefully opened the book to the very back, to a page that was almost glued to the binding from years of being closed. Tucked into the spine was a small yellowed photograph. He slid it out and held it up. It was a picture of a young Arthur and a leaner laughing, sitting on a picnic blanket, the very book visible beside them. 2 dozen were ever made. He turned the compass over, pointing to a tiny, almost invisible mark near the hinge. This stamp here, it's not a maker's mark, it's an inventory mark from the Royal Society, itself nearly worn away. But it's there, and the brass, it's not chemically aged. The specific alloy they used develops that particular deep mellow tone over centuries. You can't replicate it. He handed the compass back to Arthur. It's not only genuine, Arthur, it's a piece of historical significance. A survivor, the logs from that expedition, recorded one of these compasses being lost in a river crossing. They assumed it was gone forever to have it surface now. It's quite remarkable. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Robert looked as if he'd been physically struck. Caroline was staring at the compass, as if it had just sprouted wings. Dr. Finch continued almost as an afterthought. As for value at auction, with its provenance confirmed, I wouldn't be surprised if it fetched well into the 6 figures, possibly closer to 7. It's that rare. And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the room, inverted, the object of their mockery, was suddenly the most valuable, most interesting thing in the house. The conversation exploded. But it was no longer directed at me with pity. It was a barrage of questions for Dr. Finch, of sudden newfound admiration for the compass. Arthur held it with a kind of awe, looking at me with a depth of gratitude I had never seen before. But the real moment, the one I will remember forever, was when the conversation lulled for a second. Robert, trying desperately to salvage his dignity, muttered, well, a lucky find, I suppose. Mark looked right at him, his arm slipping around my shoulder. It wasn't luck, Robert. It was her eyes. She saw the beauty in it, when everyone else would have just walked right past. I've always trusted her instinct. It's nice to have that validated. I didn't need the validation, not really, but feeling his unwavering support, seeing the shift from condescension to sheer stunned respect, it was a different kind of warmth. It wasn't about the money, it was about the quiet victory of being seen, of trusting the quiet voice inside you that recognizes something genuine, even when the noise of the world tries to tell you it's fake. The compass had found its true north, and in doing so it had finally shown them mine. The dining room was loud, warm from all the bodies, and the big meal we'd just finished. The air smelled like roasted turkey and pine from the Christmas tree in the corner. Everyone was a little drowsy, but there was this buzz of anticipation, too. You know how it is after dessert, when the real event begins, the gift-giving. I've been looking for this for 20 years, David whispered. He turned to me. and the look on his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a love so deep it made my breath catch. How did you find it? All around the base of the tree, the presents were piled high, big boxes wrapped in shiny paper, with elaborate bows, small flat ones, that probably held gift cards, long thin ones that hinted at scarves, or maybe a fancy bottle of wine. My sister-in-law Carol, she always goes all out. Her gifts are these huge productions, layers of tissue paper, and designer labels. She was already beaming, proud of the mountain of stuff she'd brought. And then there was my little offering. I'd placed it on the table earlier, away from the glittering spectacle under the tree. It was a small box clumsily wrapped in plain brown paper, no ribbon. I'd just tied a piece of twine around it. It looked insignificant next to Carol's mountain. It was barely noticeable. But I saw my husband David glance at it, just a quick look, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, before he turned back to his brother's story about a new car. The gift exchange began. There was the rustle of paper, the oohs and ahs, the chorus of "you shouldn't have," and it's perfect. Carol's daughter, my niece Sarah, unwrapped a new smartphone and squealed with delight. David got a beautiful leather wallet from his brother. He smiled, thanked him, ran his thumb over the fine stitching. It was a good gift, a practical, expensive gift. Then it got quiet for a moment. The big flashy presents were all open. That's when I reached over and picked up the small brown box. I held it in my hands. It was so light it felt almost empty. I walked over to David and placed it in his lap. He looked down at it, a little surprised. "What's this?" he said, a gentle smile on his face. "I thought we said no more gifts after the big one." "Just a little something," I said softly. The family's attention shifted. Carol leaned forward, her head tilted. "Well, go on, David, open it. It's so tiny." "Is it jewelry?" She sounded hopeful, but there was a hint of something else in her voice, a skepticism. David carefully untied the piece of twine. He peeled back the brown paper, revealing a simple, unmarked cardboard box underneath. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, was a simple mason jar, and inside the jar was dirt, just plain dark brown dirt. The room was silent for a beat too long. Then a snort came from across the room. It was Carol's husband, Mark. "Is that dirt?" he said, a laugh bubbling under his words. Carol's face went from confused to amused. "Oh my God, it's a jar of dirt." She started to laugh, a high tinkling sound that filled the room. "What on earth is this, a joke?" All the eyes in the room were on me now, but the judgment was gone, replaced by a stunned silence. "You talked about it so often," I said, my voice steady, "about how much it meant to you." I remembered the title, the publisher you mentioned. Once I just started looking. It took a while. Sarah, the teenager, giggled behind her hand. "Aunt Sarah, did you forget to get Uncle David a real present?" The laughter spread. It wasn't mean-spirited, not exactly. It was just incredulous. It was the laughter of people confronted with something so absurdly simple that it had to be a mistake, or a prank. "A jar of dirt," Mark repeated, shaking his head, as he chuckled. "I've heard of homemade gifts, but that's a new one. You could have just scooped it up from the backyard and saved yourself the trip to the store." David hadn't moved. He was just staring at the jar in the box. His smile had faded, replaced by a stillness I knew well. His fingers, which had been resting on the cardboard, slowly moved to the jar itself. He wrapped his hand around the cool glass. He didn't lift it out. He just held it, his thumb stroking the side. I didn't look at the others. I kept my eyes on his face. I saw the moment it happened. I saw the memory hit him. His breath caught, just a little hitch in his chest. His eyes, which had been crinkled with laughter lines moments before, went wide, and then they filled with tears. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. Then another. He wasn't sobbing, he was just overflowing. The laughter in the room stuttered and died. The jokes died on their lips. The silence that fell this time was different. It was heavy, it was charged. Carol's amused expression melted into confusion. "David, honey, what is it? What's wrong?" He didn't seem to hear her. He finally lifted the jar from the box, cradling it in both hands like it was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. He held it up, his gaze fixed on the dark earth inside. His voice, when he finally spoke, was thick with emotion. It was low and rough, barely more than a whisper, but it carried through the dead quiet room. "It's from Miller's Field," he said. No one said a word. He swallowed hard, trying to compose himself. "You remember Miller's Field, the old ballpark on the edge of town? The one they tore down, must be 20 years ago now." He looked around at his family. But his eyes were seeing something else entirely. My grandfather, he used to take me there every Saturday morning before anyone else was awake. But I had a different idea for months. David had been talking about his grandfather, a man he adored. He'd tell me stories late at night, his voice full of a fond, distant sadness. He talked about the old man's study, the smell of leather and pipe tobacco, and a specific book of poetry he'd read from. It was lost, he said, after his grandfather passed away, probably sold off accidentally, with a box of other old things. The way his voice softened when he mentioned it told me everything. That book was more. The change in the room was palpable. The air, which had been thick with condescension, was now heavy with shame. David's mother reached out a trembling hand and took the book back from him. This time she cradled it. She traced the inscription with her finger, her face pale. Arthur. She breathed, her voice barely audible. I had no idea. This is a miracle. He blinked, and more tears fell. He'd bring his old mitt, the leather all cracked and soft, and he'd hit me pop flies for hours. He'd stand out there in that patchy grass in the early morning light, and he'd hit ball after ball to me. He taught me everything I know about baseball, but more than that, he talked to me. He told me stories about my dad. When he was a boy, he gave me advice. He listened. David's voice grew stronger, filled with a painful fondness. That field, it smelled like this, like damp earth and cut grass, this exact smell. When my grandfather died, that field was the place I felt closest to him. I'd go there alone sometimes, just to stand on the pitcher's mound. And remember, then they sold the land, they paved it over for a shopping center. I thought that place was just gone, a memory. He turned his tear-filled eyes to me, and in that look was a recognition, so deep, so profound, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You remembered? He whispered, his voice breaking. You remembered me talking about that, about how much I missed that place. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. Last month, he said, turning back to his family, who were all frozen in place. She asked me to go for a drive with her. We ended up in that new shopping center. I didn't think anything of it. We walked around, had a coffee. But then she led me to a corner of the parking lot right near the back. There was a little strip of land they hadn't fully paved, just some weeds and dirt, next to a drainage ditch. And she said she'd done some research, found the old property maps, and she was sure as she could be that this spot, this exact spot, was where the pitcher's mound used to be. He looked down at the jar again, a sob catching in his throat, and she brought a little jar, and she scooped up some of this dirt for me. The jar of dirt was no longer a joke, it was a relic. It was a piece of his childhood, a piece of his grandfather, a piece of a sacred place that had been lost to time. It was the smell of a Saturday morning, the sound of a baseball smacking into a leather mitt, the feeling of being small and safe and loved. Carol's face was pale, her hand was over her mouth. Mark looked down at his shoes, ashamed. The expensive gifts surrounding us, the smartphone, the leather wallet, all of it suddenly felt hollow. They were just things, they had a price tag. This jar of dirt was priceless. David reached out with his free hand and took mine. His grip was tight, desperate. Almost all these years, he said, his voice raw, I've carried that memory around, but I thought the place itself was gone forever, and you found a way to bring a piece of it back to me. You gave me back my pitcher's mound. His brother stammered an apology, his face red. His sister was completely silent, staring at her napkin. The priceless scarf and the expensive champagne sitting on the table suddenly looked cheap and meaningless. He pulled me into a hug, the jar pressed between us. I could feel the tremors running through his body. He was crying freely now, quiet, shaking sobs of a grief and a gratitude so long buried. The family just watched. There were no more words. What could anyone say? The message wasn't about the dirt. It was never about the dirt. It was about the memory it held. It was about the fact that I had listened, truly listened, to a story he'd told me years ago, a story about a loss he thought was insignificant to anyone but him. It was about the effort to find that lost place, to honor it, to give him something he didn't even know he needed, a tangible connection to a love he thought he could only visit in his mind. The best gifts aren't the ones that cost the most, they are the ones that say louder than any words ever could. I see you, I know your heart, I remember the parts of you that you think are forgotten, and I cherish them. That jar was just a container. What it really held was proof that he was known deeply and completely by the person he loved. And in the end, that's the only gift that really matters. David came back to his seat, but he didn't sit down. He put his hand on my shoulder, a firm, warm pressure. She listened, he said to his family, his voice strong with pride. She listened to a story I told. And she understood what it meant. She found a piece of our family that I thought was gone. She gave us back a memory. His mother looked from the book to me, and for the first time her gaze held no criticism, only a kind of bewildered respect. Thank you, she said. And it sounded genuine. This is the most incredible gift. The rest of the evening was different. The conversation was quieter. People spoke to me, not as an outsider to be tolerated, but as someone who belonged. I was the keeper of a secret, the restorer of a lost treasure. But that wasn't the vindication that mattered. The real prize was the way David looked at me. The pain of being the outsider was gone from his eyes, replaced by a pure, unshakable pride. He held my hand under the table, his thumb making slow, steady circles on my palm. Later, as we were putting on our coats to leave, his mother approached me. She hesitated for a moment. Then she surprised me by pulling me into a brief, awkward hug. I was wrong, she murmured softly near my ear, about a great many things. We drove home in a comfortable silence. The city lights slid past the car windows. David reached over and took my hand, lifting it to his lips. You knew, didn't you? He said. You knew what they would say when they saw it. I had an idea, I admitted. He shook his head in amazement. And you just sat there and smiled. You let them mock the most thoughtful, meaningful gift I have ever received. You knew its real value the whole time. I looked out at the passing lights. The real value wasn't in proving them wrong. It wasn't in the stunned silence or the stammered apologies. The value was in the weight of that old book in my hands. When I found it, knowing the joy it would bring to the man I loved, the value was in the memory of his grandfather, now returned to its rightful place. The price tag means nothing, it's the love and the listening that gives a thing its worth. And that night I knew without a doubt that our worth was immeasurable. Then paper and ink, it was a portal to a man he missed dearly. The air in my sister-in-law's living room was always thick this time of year, not just with the scent of pine and cinnamon, but with something sharper, a quiet competition. The annual gift exchange was less about Christmas spirit and more about a silent, ruthless display of status. You could see it in the way the presents were arranged under the tree, sleek, heavy boxes from high-end department stores, wrapped in professional metallic paper. You just knew they contained designer watches, the latest tech cashmere sweaters with price tags that would make you wince. I'd been married to David for 5 years, and for 5 years I'd felt like a fish out of water at this event. My family, we were different. A knitted scarf made with love was the greatest gift you could receive. But here it was about the label, the receipt tucked neatly inside, just in case. This year, I decided I wasn't going to play their game. I am a painter. It's not just a hobby for me, it's the way I breathe. So I decided to give a piece of my breath to them. For months I worked in my studio at the back of our house. The subject was their family home, the very one we were in. But not as it was now, all staged and perfect. I painted it as I remembered it from an old photograph David had from a summer afternoon 20 years ago. The porch swing was crooked. There were toys scattered in the front yard. The light was warm and golden, full of memory and a quiet, unpolished love. I captured the feeling of that place. The soul of it. It was the most honest work I'd ever done. David would come in late at night after work, still in his suit, and stand behind me. He'd rest his hands on my shoulders and just look. He never said much, just a quiet, they have no idea what they're about to receive. He knew about my other life, the one I kept separate from the pressure of his family. He was the only one who knew the name I painted under the gallery that represented me, the quiet success I'd built for myself. I liked it that way. It kept the art pure. He urged me to sign the painting with my real name. Just this once, let them see you, he said. But I was too nervous. I signed it with my initials, small and discreet, in the corner. Wrapping it was an event in itself. I used thick handmade paper and a simple twine bow. It looked humble next to the glittering piles under the tree. As I placed it there, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. David caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, steady nod. He was my anchor in all this. The gift exchange started with the usual fanfare, ripping paper, exaggerated gasps, the loud recitation of brand names. Oh, a Rolex you shouldn't have. Is this the new model? Incredible. I watched as my present was passed over again and again, saved for later, deemed less important. Finally, it was the only one left. My mother-in-law Carol picked it up with a slightly puzzled look. This must be from you, Sarah, she said, her tone already hinting at a lack of expectation. She untied the twine carefully, a slow, almost theatrical unveiling When the painting was fully revealed, she held it up, there was a beat of silence, then a quiet "oh, it wasn't a good oh." It was the sound of confusion. My brother-in-law Mark leaned forward squinting. "What is it, did you make this, Sarah?" So I started looking. I spent weekends in dusty secondhand bookshops, scrolling through online auctions for rare editions. I became an expert on early 20th century bindings. And then I found it in a tiny thrift store on the other side of town, tucked away on a bottom shelf between an outdated encyclopedia and a cheap romance novel. Was a worn green leather cover, the gold lettering was faded. But the title was right. My heart hammered in my chest as I carefully opened it, and there on the fly. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. It's the house from that summer you all talk about. Mark chuckled, not unkindly, but with a sort of paternal amusement. Well, isn't that thoughtful? Homemade gifts are always so personal. The way he said homemade made it sound synonymous with cheap. Then my sister-in-law Jessica chimed in. She was holding her new diamond pendant up to the light. It's very sweet, Sarah, really. It must be so hard trying to find something meaningful on a tight budget. I always say it's the thought that counts. She smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. The condescension was a physical weight in the room. Carol set the painting down on the coffee table, leaning it against a stack of glossy boxes. It's very nice, dear. Well, find a place for it, maybe in the guest bedroom. That was the final blow. The guest bedroom, where things go that you don't really want to see. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. I looked down at my hands, willing the tears not to come. I could feel David beside me. He had been quiet still, but I could sense the tension radiating from him. It was a quiet, coiled energy I knew well. Then he moved. He didn't stand up quickly. It was a slow, deliberate unfolding. The room didn't go quiet all at once, but his presence commanded a gradual silence. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up the painting. He held it gently, cradling it like it was the most precious thing in the world. You think this is a nice, simple little painting? He began, his voice low and even, but it carried to every corner of the room. You think it's a cute hobby, a budget-friendly solution? He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering on Mark and Jessica. You're wrong. He turned the painting around so they could all see it again. This homemade gift, as you called it, is a S.A. Clark original. He used the pseudonym, the name they would have seen in art magazines, if they ever read them. I saw a flicker of recognition on my father-in-law's face. David continued, her last piece, smaller than this, sold at auction for $40,000. This painting of your home, filled with a history she took the time to learn and understand, is priceless. There are collectors waiting for her next work. There's a waiting list a mile long. The room was utterly silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Jessica's diamond pendant hung forgotten in her hand. In a spidery, elegant script was the inscription, for my dearest Eleanor, may these words always bring you solace. Yours, Arthur. Eleanor was David's grandmother. Arthur was his grandfather. I paid $10 for it. It was the most valuable thing I had ever held. David pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he brought up the website of the gallery that represented me. He turned the screen to show them. There I was, my professional photo under my pseudonym, and right on the homepage, featured prominently, was a preview of my upcoming show, with a small image of the very painting they had just ridiculed. The headline read, S.A. Clark's intimate new collection, where memory resides. She didn't give you this because she couldn't afford a real gift, David said, his voice gaining a sharp edge. She gave it to you because she wanted to give you something real, something that came from her heart and her immense talent, something worth more than any watch or piece of jewelry in this room, and you treated it like a consolation prize. The shift was immediate and profound. Carol was the first to move. She stood up and took the painting from David's hands. She brought it closer to her face, her eyes scanning every brushstroke, every subtle blend of color. The light, she whispered, her voice trembling. You captured the light on the old porch swing. I'd forgotten about that. Mark leaned in his earlier amusement, completely gone, replaced by a kind of awe. You're S.A. Clark. I read about her in a magazine at the dentist's office last week. They called her the most important new voice in contemporary realism. Suddenly, the painting wasn't a simple object anymore. It was a treasure. They were all crowding around it, pointing out details, seeing it with entirely new eyes. The derision was gone, replaced by a hushed reverence. Jessica came over to me, her face flushed. Sarah, I had no idea. I am so sorry. It's breathtaking, truly. Would you ever consider doing a portrait of the children? I'd pay whatever your rate is, of course. The requests started flowing, then commission's questions about my process, apologies wrapped in flattery. The power in the room had completely inverted. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming in-law, with a quaint little hobby. I was an artist, a respected one. I looked over at David. He was standing back watching me, a small, proud smile on his face. He had known all along that my talent was my power. He hadn't revealed my secret to boast, but to defend the value of my heart, my work, against their shallow measuring sticks. The gift they had mocked minutes before was now the centerpiece of the evening, the one thing that would be remembered long after the batteries in the new gadgets had died, and the sweaters had gone out of style. They had finally seen that the true price of a gift has nothing to do with a receipt, and everything to do with the soul of the person who created it. I've always known what my husband's family values. It's in the way his mother makes a point of mentioning the brand of her new handbag, the specific vintage of the wine. They're serving it's in the way his father tells a story about a business deal, always circling back to the final price tag. They live in a world of established tangible things. If you can't see it, touch it, or brag about its cost, it barely registers for them. Value is a number on a receipt. For me, it's a number on a ticker symbol. Now the moment of truth had arrived. The gift exchange was beginning, moving around the table with a predictable rhythm. His sister presented a silk scarf from a designer boutique, his brother a bottle of incredibly expensive champagne. The reactions were appropriately impressed. Then all eyes turned to me. I placed the simple, unadorned box I had wrapped myself on the table in front of David's mother. Which is why I knew my gift for my father-in-law's 70th birthday would be a hard sell. Everyone else was bringing the usual suspects: a ridiculously expensive bottle of aged scotch, a gold watch, a weekend golf trip to some exclusive resort. Id wrapped a simple flat box. Inside wasn't a luxury item. It was a single share of stock, beautifully framed. The party was at their house, all polished marble and artwork chosen to impress. When it came time for gifts, I placed the box in his hands. He tore open the paper with a practiced flourish, expecting, I think, a rare book or perhaps a signed photograph. He held up the frame, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. What's this then? He asked, turning it over in his hands. A certificate of some kind. It's a share of stock, I said, my voice calm, in a company I thought you'd appreciate. It's a piece of the future. The silence was immediate and heavy. Then his brother, my uncle-in-law, let out a short, sharp laugh. A share of stock? One share? What is this, a gift for a college student? The dam broke, his sister chimed in, her voice dripping with a kind of performative pity. Oh, honey, did you not know what to get him? A single share? You could have just gone in on the watch with us. We wouldn't have minded. Quite the conversation starter, his mother said, not even trying to hide her disdain. I suppose it's better than a paperweight. At least it's already framed. The jokes started to fly around the room. They asked if Id bought it with my leftover lunch money. They speculated on which pennystock Id scraped together enough to afford. They called it impersonal, lazy, a frankly bizarre present. I just stood there, letting the wave of their judgment wash over me. I took a slow sip of my wine, the rich red liquid, a stark contrast to the pale champagne everyone else was holding. I didn't look at my husband. I didn't need to. He was standing slightly apart from the group, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He watched his family, his own family, tear into me. And he just waited. He let the moment build, let them fully commit to their ridicule. He knew exactly what was in that frame. Finally, as the laughter began to die down into smug, satisfied headshakes, he cleared his throat. The room quieted, turning to him, expecting him to smooth things over, to apologize for his odd wife. She picked it up with a delicate, almost theatrical slowness. Oh, how lightweight, she said, her voice dripping with a polite curiosity that barely concealed her assumptions. She untied the ribbon, peeled back the paper, and lifted the lid. The rustle of tissue paper seemed deafening. She pulled out the book. Daddy, said his voice even and clear, look at the certificate again. Look at the company name and the date of issue. My father-in-law, still looking mildly offended, squinted at the elegant script in the frame. He read the name aloud slowly. It was a name everyone in the world knows, now a name synonymous with innovation, with global dominance. But on that certificate, it was just a startup's name from a time before it was a household word. The room was silent, now a different kind of silence. This wasn't confusion. This was the quiet before a storm of realization. That's not just any share. My husband continued, his gaze sweeping across his stunned family. That's share number 143 from the very first round of funding. I bought it with my entire first ever paycheck from my summer internship. I was 19. I thought the idea was brilliant. I put every cent I had into it, which wasn't much. I never sold not a single share, I just held on. He looked at me, then his eyes full of a deep proud love. She tracked it down. She spent months finding a collector who had an original certificate from that initial offering. She had it authenticated, framed. It's not a new share, it's the actual one from the very beginning. The kicker, the part that made his father's face go pale, was what he said next. You all know what the company is worth now, that single share, because of stock splits, because of its age, its provenance. It's not worth a few $100s. He paused, letting the number hang in the air, a tangible, monstrous figure. It's worth just over $2 million. The sound that followed wasn't laughter. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath. You could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. The golf trip was a few thousand. The watch was 20. The scotch was a couple hundred. My flat, simple, cheap gift was worth more than all of their contributions, combined, probably more than some of their cars. The dismissal, the mockery, the condescending pity, it all curdled in the air, turning into something sour and shameful. Their entire value system, the foundation of their status-obsessed world, crumbled. Right there in the living room. The most valuable thing in the room wasn't a sparkling object. It was a piece of paper. They had all laughed at it. Wasn't a symbol of wealth spent, but of wealth created, of vision, of patience. His mother's hand went to her pearls. His uncle stared at the frame, as if it had suddenly burst into flames. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint clink of ice in my glass, as I took another sip. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to gloat. The truth of it was so much louder than their laughter had ever been. My quiet understanding of value, of history, of what truly constitutes a legacy, had just spoken for itself. Their ignorance had a price, and it was the humiliation of realizing that the person they'd written off as financially naive was the only one in the room who understood what real investment meant. It wasn't an investment in a company, it was an investment in a story, in a man's young. For a moment there was silence, then a snicker from his brother. A book, he said, a smile playing on his lips. Hope. It's a bestseller. Looks a bit used. Ambition, and it was without a doubt the investment of a lifetime. The quiet moments were always my favorite. After the kids were finally asleep, the house would settle into this deep, contented silence. We'd be on the couch, maybe a movie playing softly in the background. But we weren't really watching. It was in those spaces, in the comfortable quiet between two people who know each other better than anyone, that he would let his guard down. He'd talk about his day, of course, the usual things. But sometimes his voice would get this faraway quality, and he'd start talking about a different life, a life that wasn't about spreadsheets and quarterly reports and mortgage payments. He'd describe this old wooden boat, not a fancy yacht, nothing like that, a simple, sturdy little cabin cruiser from the 1950s with varnished teak decks and a single diesel engine. You could hear chugging from a mile away. He knew the exact model, the year, everything. He'd talk about the smell of it, that mix of old wood, saltwater, and engine oil. He'd describe waking up at dawn, anchored in some quiet cove, the only sound being the gentle slap of water against the hull. He'd go into such detail about polishing the brass fittings, about the simple satisfaction of fixing a balky bilge pump with his own two hands. It was a world away from the life we lived, a world of simplicity and silence and sky. He never called it a dream. He'd always say things like, it's a silly thought, or maybe in another lifetime. But I heard the longing in his voice. It was a quiet, persistent hum underneath all the practicality. This wasn't a fleeting fantasy. It was a part of him. He'd packed away a long time ago, thinking it was impractical, thinking it was selfish. He came from a family where you worked hard, you provided, and you didn't indulge in whims like old boats. They were pragmatists through and through. So he kept this dream to himself, a secret he only shared with me in the dark, when the world felt soft and full of possibility. And that's when I knew I had to find a way to bring that boat, that feeling, that piece of his soul into the real world. It became my own secret project. For 3 years, I squirreled away money, a little from the grocery budget, here a bonus from work there. I sold some old jewelry I never wore. I took on extra freelance projects late at night, after everyone was asleep. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the hunt. I spent months searching online listings, driving to dusty Boatyards in neighboring states, talking to old-timers who knew about these classic vessels. I found her finally up in Maine. She was in rough shape, but her lines were perfect. Her name was even Wanderer. It felt like fate. I arranged everything quietly, the survey, the purchase, the transfer to a marina not far from here, where she could be restored. I worked with a mechanic and a carpenter, paying them in installments to get her seaworthy again. It was the most exhausting, thrilling secret I've ever kept. There were so many times I almost told him, when the stress of managing it all felt overwhelming. But I held on. I wanted the moment to be perfect. His mother turned it over in her hands, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the worn edges of the cover. She didn't open it. She just held it like it might be dirty. It's very thoughtful, dear. She said, her tone implying the exact opposite. Did you find it at one of those charming little charity shops you like so much? The condescension was a physical force in the room. I saw David flinch. He stared down at his plate, his jaw clenched. The space between us felt vast and cold. He was embarrassed for me, or the day of his birthday party. My stomach was in knots. The house was full of his family, his parents, his brothers, their wives, and kids. The air was thick with chatter, and the smell of good food. Gifts were piled high on the table in the corner. Big boxes wrapped in shiny paper with elaborate bows. My little box felt impossibly small and light in my pocket. It was just a simple small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bit of cotton, was a single key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned brass key, the kind that feels solid in your hand, and attached to it was a simple keychain, a little piece of driftwood I'd found and polished smooth. That was it, the culmination of 3 years of work, of hope, of love, distilled down to this one simple object. The gift opening began. There were expensive sweaters, the latest tech, gadgets, a new set of golf clubs from his brothers. He smiled and thanked everyone, the gracious host. But it was the same polite smile he used at company parties. Then his mother, always the orchestrator, pointed at me. And what did you get for your husband, dear? Something special, I hope. All eyes turned to me. I could feel my face grow warm. I pulled the small box from my pocket. You could see the confusion on their faces. It was so small, so insignificant looking. His eldest brother Mark chuckled. What is that, a paperclip? Did you forget to go shopping? A ripple of laughter went through the group. His mother's smile was tight. Well, it's the thought that counts, she said, in a tone that suggested the thought had been very, very small indeed. My husband took the box from me. His expression was curious, but still polite. He lifted the lid. He saw the key. There was a moment, just a heartbeat, where nothing happened. Then his fingers, which had been so casual, tightened around the little wooden box. His knuckles went white. He slowly reached in and picked up the key, the driftwood keychain turning slowly in the air. He didn't look at his family. He looked only at me. And his eyes, they just welled up, not just a little bit, full, silent tears that spilled over and ran down his cheeks. The room went completely quiet. The joking had stopped. His voice was thick, choked with emotion. It was barely a whisper. Is this what I think it is? I just nodded, my own throat too tight to speak. He looked down at the key in his palm, cradling it like it was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. Then he looked back at his stunned family. You all laughed, he said. And his voice was stronger now, filled with a wonder I hadn't heard in years. You thought it was a joke, this key, this little key. He held it up for them all to see. This is the key to the Wanderer.